They didn't invite her as a guest, they invited her to work. The girl they called Charity Case for 4 years. The one who wore the same 3 outfits on rotation, who ate free lunch while they carried designer bags. They wanted her there, not to celebrate with them, but to serve them champagne and remind everyone exactly where she belonged. But when she walked through those doors, nobody was laughing anymore. From which corner of the world are you watching this video today? If you believe in the power of resilience and unexpected triumph, subscribe to Stories Untold. What happened next would leave 300 wedding guests absolutely speechless. The private dining room at Aurelia's Steakhouse in Manhattan glowed with a kind of warm amber lighting that cost extra. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, where autumn leaves painted the landscape in gold and crimson. Crystal wine glasses caught the candlelight, casting dancing shadows across the white tablecloth where 4 women sat in designer dresses and practiced laughter. Madison Whitmore occupied her chair like a throne, back straight, chin elevated, one perfectly manicured hand resting on the table, as if posing for a photograph that didn't exist. Her engagement ring caught the light constantly, a 5-carat diamond that she repositioned frequently to ensure maximum visibility. Wedding planning had consumed her life for 8 months, but it wasn't about marriage. It was about the production, the spectacle, the proof of arrival. Across from her sat Harper Sinclair, chief bridesmaid and Madison's oldest friend, though friendship between women like them was more strategic alliance than genuine connection. Harper's auburn hair fell in perfect waves, her emerald dress matching her eyes with calculated precision. She documented everything on her phone, angles practiced, filters predetermined. To Madison's right, Peyton Cross sipped champagne with deliberate slowness, her grey suit and simple jewelry announcing her profession before words could. Corporate event planner, the kind who transformed weddings into productions worth $500,000. She had built an empire on wealthy people's insecurity, charging obscene amounts to create moments that looked effortless but required military precision. Completing the quartet was Sutton Blake, younger by 2 years but perhaps most dangerous. She had inherited her father's hedge fund connections and her mother's social cruelty, creating a combination that made her both valuable and volatile. She checked her Cartier watch constantly, scrolling through her tablet with restless energy. They had been meeting like this for months, planning Madison's wedding to Preston Carmichael III, with enthusiasm that revealed how empty their lives actually were. Women who measured worth in Instagram engagement and guest list exclusivity. Madison set down her wine glass with decisive precision, her expression shifting into something calculated. "I've been thinking," she began, voice carrying that particular tone of manufactured inspiration, about the catering staff for the cocktail hour. Harper glanced up from her phone, curiosity flickering. "What about them? Peyton already booked the premium service from Elite Events." "I know," Madison said slowly, deliberately. "But I want to add someone specific." Sutton leaned forward, recognizing opportunity for entertainment. "Who?" Madison pulled out her phone, scrolling until she found what she wanted, then turned the screen toward the others with theatrical presentation. "Remember Ivy Brennan?" The reaction was immediate and visceral. Harper's mouth fell open before erupting into laughter that turned heads from neighboring tables. "Oh my God," she gasped between fits. "The scholarship girl? From Ashford Academy?" Peyton squinted at the old photograph, recognition dawning with contemptuous disbelief. "The one who worked in the cafeteria during lunch to pay for her uniform." Sutton's grin spread slowly, eyes lighting with cruel brilliance. "This is absolutely genius. You want her to serve drinks at your wedding?" Madison nodded, satisfaction evident. "I found her on social media. She's still in Connecticut, still struggling. I thought it would be perfect symmetry. She served us in high school, she can serve us now." Harper picked up the thread immediately, understanding the full scope. "And everyone will see her, everyone from Ashford will be there." "The contrast alone is exactly the point," Madison finished. "Some people rise, others stay exactly where they started. Visual representation of success." Peyton was already making notes, professional mask slipping to reveal something darker. "I can make it happen." Add her to the evening staff roster, put her on champagne service for the cocktail hour. Prime visibility. Sutton raised her glass. To Madison Whitmore, soon to be Carmichael, may her wedding be absolutely unforgettable. They clinked glasses, the sound sharp and bright, sealing their plan with casual cruelty that came so naturally they didn't recognize it as cruelty at all. Madison typed out a message on her phone, composing with careful language. "Hi Ivy, it's Madison Whitmore from Ashford Academy. My wedding coordinator reached out about hiring additional staff for my wedding at the Vandermeer estate. I specifically requested you. It would mean so much to have someone from our school days there. The pay is excellent. Hope you can make it." She added 3 heart emojis and hit send. The notification appeared. Message delivered. Harper leaned over to read it, laughing. "Someone from our school days? That's evil." "That strategy," Madison corrected. "She'll think I'm being kind, including her. She'll show up so grateful," Peyton smirked, "if she even shows up at all." Madison's smile was cold and certain. "Oh, she'll show. People like Ivy always show up. They never stop hoping they'll finally be accepted." The memories surfaced in fragments, sharp and painful like broken glass. The cafeteria first, that universal theatre of adolescent hierarchy. Ashford Academy's dining hall was all dark wood paneling and chandeliers, designed to look like old money, even though most families there had earned their wealth in the last generation. Long tables filled with students in expensive uniforms, laughing and trading stories from their weekend homes in the Hamptons. In the far corner behind a service window, Ivy Brennan wore a hairnet and plastic gloves, serving lunch to her classmate. She was 15, thin and pale, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that had learned not to make contact. She scooped mashed potatoes onto plates extended through the window, never looking up, never acknowledging the whispers and pointed fingers. "That's so sad," someone said loud enough to be heard. "Can you imagine having to work during lunch?" Another voice added, "I heard her mum cleans houses." Madison's voice cut through, casual and devastating. Laughter rippled through the line. Ivy's hand never shook, never hesitated. She simply continued serving, face blank, having perfected the art of appearing absent while remaining present. The next memory was darker. The scholarship announcement board in the main hallway, where academic achievements were posted for everyone to see. Ivy's name appeared at the top. National Merit Finalist. Presidential Scholar Candidate. Perfect 4.0 GPA. But someone had taken a red marker and written across it. Still poor, though. Ivy stood before the board, staring at the vandalism with an expression that revealed nothing. She didn't cry, didn't report it, didn't give them ammunition. She simply took a photo with her phone, documenting it, then walked away with measured steps. Behind her, Harper and Sutton watched from around the corner, hands covering their mouths to muffle giggles. Another fragment, the college counselor's office. Ivy sat across from Mrs. Patterson, whose sympathetic smile couldn't quite mask her pity. "Ivy, your grades are exceptional. You could get into any school. But given your financial situation, you need to be realistic about options." Ivy's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm applying to the service academies. Full scholarship. Full ride." Mrs. Patterson's expression flickered with doubt. "Those are extremely competitive. Maybe have backup plans. State schools with financial aid." "I'll get in," Ivy said quietly with absolute certainty. The final memory was graduation day. Ashford Academy's campus was pristine, all manicured lawns and ivy-covered brick buildings. Graduates emerged in caps and gowns, surrounded by proud families, professional photographers, tears and embraces. Ivy walked out alone. Her mother couldn't take off work, couldn't afford to close the cleaning business for a day. Ivy stood at the bottom of the steps in her borrowed gown, clutching her diploma, watching as her classmates posed for family photos she would never have. Madison walked past with her parents, both in expensive designer clothes, a professional photographer following them. She glanced at Ivy, then away, as if she were furniture, unremarkable and forgettable. But Ivy didn't look away. She stared after them with an expression that wasn't anger or envy. It was determination, quiet and absolute and unbreakable. A voice drifted over the image, soft and steady. They wrote her off as nothing. A charity case who would never escape her circumstances. They had no idea what she was capable of. The Vandermeer estate rose against the Connecticut coastline like a monument to excess. 3 stories of Georgian architecture, all white columns and sweeping staircases, surrounded by gardens that required a full-time staff of 12. String lights wrapped around ancient oak trees, glowing like captured stars. A string quartet played near the reflecting pool, their music drifting across perfectly manicured lawns. Luxury vehicles arrived in constant succession. Valets in white gloves rushed to open doors for guests emerging in couture gowns and custom tuxedos. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a performance of wealth, every detail calculated to impress. Madison stood at the entrance in her custom Vera Wang dress, $40,000 of Italian silk and French lace. Preston beside her in Tom Ford, looking proud and slightly overwhelmed. They greeted arrivals with practiced grace, air-kissing and laughing at appropriate moments. Harper, Peyton, and Sutton positioned themselves strategically, documenting everything. Harper's Instagram story was already 20 posts deep, each caption more effusive than the last. Peyton oversaw the coordination with military efficiency, speaking into a headset, ensuring every detail executed perfectly. Sutton circulated with champagne, collecting compliments like currency. Inside, the ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across black marble floors. Round tables draped in champagne-colored silk filled the space, each topped with elaborate floral arrangements of white roses and orchids that cost more than most people's monthly rent. At the far end, a massive projection screen displayed a slideshow of Madison and Preston's love story, carefully curated to emphasize exotic locations and expensive experiences. 300 guests filled the space, the social elite of Connecticut and Manhattan. Old money mixing with new, all united by wealth and the performance of sophistication. Conversations hummed with comfortable arrogance, laughter punctuated by the gentle clinking of baccarat crystal. In the service area behind the kitchen, staff prepared for cocktail hour. Servers in black vests and bow ties lined up, receiving final instructions from the catering manager. Among them stood a woman in her late 20s, dark hair pulled into a severe bun, wearing the same black vest and white shirt as the others. She stood apart, not mixing with the other servers, her posture rigid and her expression unreadable. When the catering manager called out names and positions, she responded to Ivy Brennan with a simple nod. The manager assigned her to champagne service in the main ballroom during cocktail hour. Premium positioning, maximum visibility. Harper found Madison near the bridal suite, pulling her aside with barely contained excitement. "She's here, she actually came." Madison's eyes widened with delighted malice. "Ivy, in full server uniform, ready to pass out drinks to everyone from Ashford." Madison laughed, the sound too loud for the elegant space. "This is perfect, absolutely perfect." They clinked champagne flutes, sealing their victory. In the ballroom, cocktail hour began. Guests flowed in from the ceremony, filling the space with animated conversation. The slideshow cycled through images, and when a photo from Madison's high school years appeared, several people pointed and laughed with recognition. Then Ivy's yearbook photo appeared on the massive screen, though she hadn't been included intentionally. It was part of a group shot from an academic achievement ceremony. But there she was in the background, thin and pale in an ill-fitting uniform. Someone near the bar whispered, "Is that the scholarship girl?" Another voice answered, "I heard she's serving drinks tonight." Madison hired her for the catering staff. Ripples of laughter spread through clusters of former Ashford students. The schadenfreude was palpable, the satisfaction of seeing hierarchies maintained. Madison stood near the entrance with Preston, greeting late arrivals, when Sutton approached with champagne and something sharper in her expression. "You're going to want to see this," Sutton said quietly. "See what?" "The parking area. Something's happening." Madison frowned. "What do you mean, something's?" She was cut off by a sound. Low and rhythmic, growing steadily louder. A deep mechanical thrumming that vibrated through the floor, rattling glassware on tables. Conversations faltered. People looked around in confusion. The sound intensified, building into something that couldn't be ignored. Chandeliers began to sway. A champagne flute tipped over, spilling across white silk. Harper grabbed Madison's arm. "What is that?" The French doors blew open, wind rushing in with violent force. Guests surged toward windows and balconies, desperate to see. And that's when everything changed.
The sound became a living thing. It throbbed through the marble floors, rattled the crystal in the chandeliers, turned conversations into half-finished questions that hung in the air. Someone near the bar laughed nervously. Another guest clutched their pearls, eyes wide, scanning the vaulted ceiling as if something might drop through it at any second. The string quartet stopped playing mid-measure. Glasses trembled on silver trays. A champagne flute slid toward the edge of a cocktail table, tipped and shattered against the floor, the crash disappearing beneath the deep, relentless roar. Harper grabbed Madison's arm, nails digging into flawless lace. "Is this fireworks?" she shouted over the vibration. "It's not fireworks," Peyton said sharply, her event planner brain already cataloging every possible disaster. "Fireworks don't make the building shake." The French doors leading to the terrace blew inward on a sudden gust, curtains snapping like sails in a storm. Cool night air and the scent of salt and disturbed earth flooded the ballroom. Half the guests surged toward the open doors in a chaotic wave. Phones lifted, screens glowing, everyone desperate to film whatever was happening. "Stay with the photographer," Madison's mother called, but Madison barely heard her. She moved with the crowd, Preston at her side, the weight of her veil dragging behind her like a tidal wave of tulle. Out on the terrace, the sound was deafening. The immaculate lawn beyond the marble balustrade had transformed into a storm of whipping grass and swirling dust. Powerful lights cut through the darkness, blindingly bright, sweeping across the estate like search beams. "Everybody step back," a security guard shouted, but no one listened. 300 people stood frozen, pressed against the stone railing, hypnotized. Over the treetops, a massive shape descended. Twin rotors churned the air, kicking up leaves and debris in violent spirals. The aircraft's nose lights blazed white-hot, slicing through the night. An American flag and U.S. Coast Guard markings flashed into view as the helicopter dropped lower, its hulking frame impossibly close to the manicured grounds. "Is that?" Preston started, stunned. "A Coast Guard bird?" a guest finished, disbelief turning his voice shrill. "At a wedding." The helicopter hovered for a moment above the far edge of the lawn, rotors screaming, then began a controlled descent. The Vandermeer estate, with all its wealth and elegance, suddenly looked fragile. Just another building at the mercy of something far greater. Madison shielded her face from the gale-force wind, veil whipping so violently it nearly tore free. "This can't be happening," she muttered. "This cannot be happening at my wedding." On the far side of the terrace, near the service entrance, a side door opened quietly. A woman in a black server's vest slipped out, head bowed against the wind. No one noticed her. Every eye was fixed on the sky. She walked with purposeful strides down the stone steps, through the tunnel of screaming air and debris, skirt whipping around her ankles. Her name tag, still clipped to her vest, read, Ivy. But within seconds, she disappeared into the shadow of a side path leading toward the estate's private dock and boathouse. No one saw her vanish. They were too busy watching the sky crack open. The helicopter touched down at the edge of the lawn with a shudder, landing gear sinking slightly into the carefully curated earth. The sound shifted from an overwhelming roar to a lower, still thundering hum as the rotors slowed. Dust settled in waves. The glowing estate lights reflected off the aircraft's gray fuselage, catching the red and white Coast Guard stripes, the rescue hoist mounted along the side. The side door slid open. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a figure stepped into the doorway, silhouetted against the cabin lights. A boot touched the grass, another followed. The woman who descended from the helicopter didn't flinch at the wind or the hundreds of eyes on her. She wore a bright orange flight suit, straps secured, patches neatly sewn across her chest and sleeves. A U.S. flag, USC, the insignia of Air Station Cape Cod. Her name tape read. Her dark hair, no longer scraped into a cafeteria worker's bun, was braided tightly down her back. She removed her flight helmet with one gloved hand, tucking it under her arm with practiced ease. Her face was older than the Ashford yearbook photo, sharper, carved by years of exhaustion and resolve. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there at 17, but her gaze, steady, direct, unshakable, was exactly the same. Only now, no one could pretend not to see her. A crewman stepped down behind her, also in orange, headset still around his neck. He paused, then snapped to attention with a crisp salute. "Mom," he shouted over the hum of the rotors, "we're secure on the ground. Local authorities notified." Per your request, rotor standing at idle. She returned the salute with flawless precision. Thank you, petty officer. The word ma'am rippled through the crowd, like a stone dropped into a still pond. Someone near the terrace whispered, Holy, that's Ivy. That's actually Ivy Brennan. Another guest fumbled with his phone, typing frantically. Search. Ivy Brennan, Coast Guard. More people followed suit, fingers racing across screens. Articles loaded. Headlines appeared. Lieutenant Ivy Brennan leads pre-dawn rescue of stranded fishermen off Georgia's bank. Coast Guard helicopter crew brings home 12 after nor'easter capsizes trawler. Local scholarship student becomes decorated rescue aviator. The murmurs turned into a wave of realization. Wait, that's her. She's the one from the hurricane footage. Remember? The clip up on the terrace. Madison's stomach dropped. Harper swayed, grabbing the railing with a shaking hand. No way, she breathed. No way, that's Ivy. It's a coincidence, Sutton said quickly, but there was no conviction in her voice. It has to be. There are a million Ivies. Preston stared, stunned. How many of them land in a helicopter on your wedding lawn? Down below, Ivy began to walk. The crew stayed near the aircraft, giving her space, understanding implicitly that whatever this was, it belonged to her. She moved across the torn-up grass with the deliberate, measured stride of someone who had walked into burning storms and survived. There was no rush in her steps, no performance. She simply advanced toward the estate, as if nothing about this night could intimidate her. Guests parted instinctively along the edge of the lawn, leaving a clear path up the stone steps to the terrace. It's like she's on a mission, someone whispered. She was, just not the kind they understood. As Ivy reached the base of the steps, the chandeliers inside the ballroom flickered, their crystals still trembling from the earlier vibration. Hundreds of eyes tracked her ascent, the orange of her flight suit stark against the white marble. Halfway up, she paused. For a split second, Ivy's gaze lifted, scanning the terrace. Her eyes locked on Madison. Recognition passed between them like a lightning strike. Madison's throat went dry. Every carefully rehearsed social script she had ever memorized evaporated. The scholarship girl she had once reduced to a punchline was standing at the bottom of her wedding steps in a uniform that commanded the kind of respect money couldn't buy. And Madison had invited her. Is this a stunt? Preston asked, voice unsteady. Did you plan this? Madison's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She had planned a humiliation. She had not planned this. On the far side of the terrace near the ballroom doors, the catering manager appeared, face pale, headset askew. Where's Ivy? He muttered to himself, scanning the room. I need her on champagne service. We're short a... He stopped when he saw the crowd at the railing, all facing the lawn. When he followed their gaze and recognized the same face now framed by a flight helmet under one arm and reflector tape under the estate lights, he slowly removed his earpiece, as if that simple action would help him process what he was seeing. Ivy reached the top step. For a moment, no one moved. Her eyes swept across the terrace, taking in the shocked faces, the open mouths, the phones clutched uselessly in frozen hands. She looked past Sutton, past Peyton, past Harper, past their designer dresses and curated hair and finely tuned expressions. Finally, she stopped 3 feet from Madison. Up close, the contrast was staggering. Madison, in her intricate, hand-beaded gown, veil fluttering in the lingering breeze. Ivy, in a flight suit, stained faintly at the knees and elbows from work that didn't care about aesthetics. They stared at each other. You, was all Madison managed, voice cracking. Ivy's expression didn't harden or soften. It simply stayed steady, impossibly calm in the eye of the storm her presence had created. You sent me an invitation, she said, voice clear enough for the nearest 50 people to hear, not accusing, not pleading, just stating a fact. Madison swallowed. I thought you might want the work. I mean, I thought it would be nice to have you here. There was a tremor under every word. The lie tasted like metal on her tongue. Harper, for once, didn't say anything. Peyton shifted her clipboard against her chest like a shield. Sutton stared at a fixed point over Ivy's shoulder, as if refusing to fully confront the scene might make it less real. From somewhere in the crowd, a man cleared his throat. Lieutenant Brennan? A figure stepped forward, threading through the guests with unhurried authority. He wore a dark blue service dress uniform, ribbons neatly arranged over his left breast, silver eagles pinned at his shoulders. He paused beside Ivy and faced the crowd. "I'm Captain Jonathan Reyes," he announced, voice carrying over the softened hum of the idling rotors. "Commanding officer at Air Station Cape Cod." The title landed with weight. "I was in the area overseeing a joint training operation," he continued, giving Ivy a brief, respectful nod. When Lieutenant Brennan requested permission to make a brief landing for a personal engagement, a murmur rippled through the onlookers. Ivy glanced at him, surprise flickering for the briefest second. She hadn't expected him to speak, to step into this, to legitimize what could have been dismissed as a dramatic entrance. Captain Reyes turned slightly, addressing the guests more directly. "For those who don't know," he said, "Lieutenant Brennan is a rescue swimmer and flight officer. She has pulled fishermen out of hurricane seas at 3 in the morning. She has hovered over breaking waves in zero visibility. She has spent hours dangling from a cable over black water so that strangers could go home to their families." His gaze swept the terrace, taking in the glittering gowns and tuxedos. "Tonight," he added, "she asked for leave to attend a wedding." The silence that followed was absolute. Somewhere behind Madison, someone sniffled. Harper lowered her phone very slowly. On the projection screen inside the ballroom, the slideshow had paused on a photo of Madison and Preston in Santorini, framed dramatically against a sunset. From this angle, through the open doors, the reflection of the terrace overlapped the image. It looked for one surreal moment, as if two different worlds had collided in the same frame. Ivy inhaled, then exhaled, centering herself. She hadn't come here for Reyes' speech. She hadn't come for applause. She hadn't even come for revenge. She had come for something simpler and far more dangerous: the truth. Her eyes found Madison's again. "I got your message," Ivy said quietly. "And I got the emails that followed." Madison flinched as if struck. "What emails?" she whispered, but the question was useless. "Too late. I didn't get them from you," Ivy continued, voice gaining strength. "I got them from someone who finally decided they were tired of laughing along." In the doorway to the ballroom, framed by the soft glow of chandelier light, a woman shifted her weight from one heel to the other. Her blonde hair was pulled into a low chignon, her dress simple but elegant, far less opulent than most of the others. Her name was Elise Carter. She had been in half of Ivy's app classes at Ashford, and she was the one who had forwarded the email thread. Now she watched, hands twisting nervously around her clutch, wondering if Ivy would expose her, drag her into the light along with the rest. Ivy didn't look at her, not yet. She stayed focused on the woman in the wedding dress. "I read everything," she said. "The jokes about my uniform. The bets about whether I'd show up. The plan to put me on display so everyone could feel better about how far they'd come." Harper squeezed her champagne flute so tightly, she thought the stem might snap. Sutton's perfectly lined lips parted, but no words emerged. Peyton, for the first time in a long time, wanted to be somewhere, anywhere, else. Captain Reyes took a small step back, giving Ivy space, but he didn't retreat. He stood close enough that anyone looking would remember she was not alone. Not anymore. Wind from the still-turning rotors brushed against the terrace, carrying the faint smell of fuel and salt and ocean. It washed over the flowers, over the candles, over the carefully arranged centerpieces inside. It carried with it the scent of every night Ivy had spent above dark water. Every moment her life had dangled by a cable. Every second that had formed the woman standing here now. Madison opened her mouth. No apology came out, only one dry, desperate question. "Why did you come?" Ivy's answer was simple: "Because you thought I wouldn't." She let the words hang there between them, like a line thrown from one world into another. Then she did something no one expected. She turned away from Madison and stepped into the ballroom. Hundreds of heads swiveled to follow her. The projection screen inside shifted, finally advancing to the next slide. An image of Madison's bridal shower appeared. Paper flowers, champagne, pastel dresses. Ivy stopped in the center of the polished floor, directly beneath the largest chandelier. Her old yearbook photo appeared next, unplanned. A glitch in the slideshow order. An image pulled from a folder of school days pictures some distant relative had uploaded. There she was at 17, in an ill-fitting uniform, hair pulled back too tightly, eyes too serious for that age. The scholarship girl, the charity case, the girl everyone learned to look through. The orange of her flight suit glowed beneath the cold light of the projected image. For a moment, the two Ivies, then and now, existed in the same space. People sucked in breaths they didn't realize they were holding. A dress rustled. A glass clinked against a table. Somewhere behind her, a woman stifled a sob. Up on the terrace, Madison stood motionless, caught between following Ivy and fleeing. Preston looked between his bride and the woman in the flight suit, something that looked unsettlingly like doubt crossing his face. Captain Reyes remained near the doorway, hands clasped behind his back, gaze calm but unblinking. On the screen, young Ivy's eyes seemed to look past everyone in the room, into a future no one there had believed in for her. On the floor, the real Ivy lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and finally turned back toward the terrace. She wasn't finished. Not yet. For a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. The great chandelier above Ivy hummed faintly, crystals still trembling. On the screen behind her, 17-year-old Ivy stared out at the world, frozen in time and expectation. On the polished floor beneath it, the real Ivy Brennan stood in bright orange, living proof that the story everyone had written for her was not the one she had chosen. She let the silence stretch. Most people in that room had built their adult lives around never having to sit in silence with their guilt. I used to wonder. Ivy began, her voice not loud but somehow carrying to the far corners of the room. If I would ever walk into a room and not feel like I had to apologize for existing. A few people shifted uncomfortably. I wondered it in this school uniform. She nodded toward the image on the screen, serving you lunch in plastic gloves. I wondered it while wiping down tables after you left, while listening to you talk about ski trips and beach houses and college tours. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Madison on the terrace. I wondered it the day somebody wrote "still poor, though" across my scholarship notice, and nobody thought it was important enough to erase. A low involuntary sound, half gasp, half groan, escaped from someone near the back. Madison closed her eyes. She remembered that red marker. She remembered laughing. I thought, Ivy continued, if I just worked hard enough, if I got the grades, if I got out, if I earned a place somewhere no one could say I didn't belong, maybe then the room would feel different. Her gaze swept across the 300 faces, past sequins and silk and carefully curated smiles. Turns out, she said, the room only changes if the people in it do. No one dared to look directly at her for a heartbeat. Then, slowly, eyes rose to meet hers. On the terrace, Harper's mascara had begun to smudge at the corners. Sutton's perfectly lined mouth pressed into a thin white line. Peyton stared at the floor, fingers digging into the edge of her clipboard. I got your emails, Ivy said. The word hung in the air like a dropped glass. Not the invitation, she clarified. That was sugary, polished, performed kindness. She lifted her chin slightly. I mean the emails that came afterward. The ones where you joked about me wearing the same shoes I wore in high school. Where you said having me here serving drinks would be poetic. Where you bet on whether I'd be desperate enough to say yes. She didn't have to raise her voice on that last word. The people who needed to hear it heard it. Madison swallowed hard. They were just the excuse withered before it fully formed. They were just what? Ivy asked, not hostile but unflinching. Jokes, nostalgia, a way to relive the good old days. Her eyes moved between Madison, Harper, Sutton, Peyton. The good old days, she said softly, were only good for some of you because someone else was paying the price. On the far side of the room, near the doorway, Elise Carter's breathing had turned shallow. Her fingers clutched her clutch so tightly the leather creaked. She couldn't stand it anymore. I'm the one who sent them, Elise blurted, voice trembling but clear enough to cut through the stillness. Heads turned. Elise took a shaking step forward, then another, until she stood not far from the edge of the dance floor. I'm the one who forwarded the emails, she said, to you. She looked at Ivy, apology naked on her face. I should have said something in high school. I didn't. I laughed. I stayed quiet. When I saw those messages last month, I couldn't do it again. Ivy held her gaze for a long moment. Thank you, she said simply. The two words were small, but they made Elise's shoulders sag with a release she hadn't realized she'd been craving for a decade. Madison took a step forward on the terrace, veil dragging. Ivy, she started, clinging to the only skill she truly possessed, reframing. This is a misunderstanding. We were being stupid, thoughtless. Weddings make people. Dramatic. We weren't trying to hurt you. Not really. I just thought that you'd remind everyone where I belonged. Ivy supplied, turning slightly to face her again. In a uniform that serves you, not in one that saves people. Madison flinched. Around her, a few guests shifted, the discomfort growing heavier than the crystal chandeliers. I wasn't supposed to be here like this, Ivy went on, glancing momentarily toward the terrace doors. We were on standby for a training op. I wasn't even sure I could make it. When Captain Reyes approved this landing, he did it because he thought it mattered for me to show up. She let her eyes find Reyes near the doorway. He gave a barely perceptible nod, confirming it. He didn't know why, Ivy added. He just trusted that it was important. Her tone changed, softening, but not in the direction Madison might have hoped. I'm not here to destroy your wedding, Ivy said. I don't care about the cake or the flowers or the slideshow. I don't care if the photos look perfect on Instagram. Her gaze returned to Madison. I'm here so that for once you don't get to rewrite the story after it's over. She gestured vaguely toward the helicopter lights still flickering through the terrace doors, the torn-up lawn beyond. You thought I'd show up through the kitchen, she said. Head down, tray in my hands, grateful for the scraps. She took a breath. And I did show up in uniform. She smoothed a hand down the front of her flight suit, the bright orange catching the ballroom lights. Just not the one you planned. A strangled laugh sob came from somewhere near the bar. Harper's hand shook so badly she had to set her glass down. Madison, for the first time that evening, looked genuinely small inside the architecture she'd built to feel large. I'm sorry, she whispered. The words were so quiet, so rarely used, that they sounded foreign in her mouth. Ivy, I'm actually sorry. I was awful to you. We all were. I told myself it was just how high school works. That you didn't care. That you were above it somehow. But that was just an excuse to keep doing it. She looked down at her dress, then back up. Tears threatening to spill but stubbornly clinging to the corners of her eyes. This wedding, this estate, this ring. She gestured vaguely at the excess around her. I thought it would finally prove I'd won. Her voice cracked on the last word. But standing here with you in that uniform, I don't even know what I thought I was winning. The confession hung in the space between them, fragile and raw. Ivy studied her for a long beat. The room watched, desperate to see whether forgiveness would be granted like a benediction or withheld like a verdict. I believe you're sorry that it turned out this way, Ivy said at last. I don't know if you're sorry for what you did, or just sorry that the consequences finally showed up wearing bright orange on your lawn. A few people sucked in sharp breaths. Madison's face crumpled minutely. I don't need you to forgive me, Madison said quickly. Fear threaded through the words. I mean, it would be nice, but I don't have the right to ask that. I'm not here to manage your feelings. Ivy cut in gently. Not anymore. The kindness in her tone made it hit harder than any cruelty could have. I don't need an apology to move on, she continued. I moved on a long time ago. On dark nights over the Atlantic. In hurricane winds. In freezing spray. I learned the difference between people who yell from safety and people who jump into the water. Her voice took on a quiet intensity. And I learned that I would rather be exhausted, soaked, scared, and doing something that matters, than comfortable and cruel in a room like this. Silence wrapped around the ballroom like a second set of walls. People who had spent their entire lives mastering the art of saying the right thing had nothing to offer. Preston cleared his throat, breaking the spell. Lieutenant Brennan, he said, the formality sounding awkward coming from him. I didn't know any of this. About high school. About the emails. About you. I just showed up tonight and a helicopter landed on the lawn. Nervous chuckles scattered weakly and died quickly. I don't know what to say that doesn't sound hollow, he admitted, glancing at Madison then back at Ivy. But thank you for what you do out there. He gestured vaguely toward the sea beyond the estate. Ivy gave a small nod. You're welcome, she said. I don't do it for thanks. But I've learned to accept it when it's real. Preston swallowed, then stepped back, hand falling away from Madison's elbow. It was a small movement. Madison felt it like a cliff edge crumbling beneath her heels. Ivy looked around one last time, at the girls who had giggled behind napkins, while she served them soggy pizza. At the boys who had mocked her for filling out military academy applications instead of Ivy League forms. At the parents who had watched and said nothing, comforting themselves with the idea that kids would be kids. "If any of you ever find yourself in trouble at sea," she said, voice steady, "if your yacht takes on water in a storm, if your fishing trip goes wrong, if your engine dies 10 miles offshore and the waves start to look bigger than you planned," she raised a hand slightly, palm up, as if offering them something tangible. "And you call for help," she continued. "You might not remember my name. You might not see my face through the rain. You'll just see a basket coming down out of the dark." Her eyes hardened, not with hatred, but with memory. "When that happens, I won't ask if you were kind to the scholarship girl at Ashford Academy." She let the words sink in. "I'll just bring you home." A tear finally broke free down Elisa's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Ivy exhaled slowly, as if something she'd been carrying for years had finally been set down. She turned to Captain Reyes. "Sir," she said quietly, enough for those near the doorway to hear, "thank you for the time." He regarded her with a mix of professional respect and something like pride. "Anytime, Lieutenant," he replied. "You ready to dust off?" She glanced once more at the screen, where her younger self had faded to the next image in the slideshow. Madison at prom, Madison at graduation. Ivy nowhere in sight. "I am now," Ivy said. She walked back through the ballroom. This time, people stepped aside with a different kind of deference, not the obsequious, calculated deference they showed to wealth. Something quieter, closer to respect. A few murmured thank you as she passed. One older guest, someone's grandfather in a perfectly pressed navy blazer, straightened and gave her a small, deliberate salute. His hand trembled, but the motion was precise. Ivy returned it without breaking stride. On the terrace, the night air met her with the lingering smell of jet fuel and torn grass. The rotors had slowed, but the helicopter still loomed, lights pulsing softly, crew waiting. "Ready when you are, ma'am," the petty officer called from near the open side door. She nodded and started down the steps. Behind her, voices resumed in the ballroom, not the easy, careless chatter from an hour ago. Quieter, jagged at the edges. Harper sank into a nearby chair, staring at her hands. Sutton disappeared into a bathroom, suddenly desperate to be alone. Peyton walked out to a side corridor, headset dangling, realizing that for all her professional control, she had never controlled anything that truly mattered. Elise made her way to the terrace rail and watched Ivy cross the lawn, the orange of her flight suit, vivid against the torn-up green. Beside Elise, Madison finally let the tears fall, black streaks cutting through perfect makeup. Her mother reached for her shoulder. Madison stepped out of reach. "Do you think she hates me?" Madison whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Elise answered quietly, gaze still fixed on the woman in orange. "I think," she said, "you're not the center of her life anymore." On the lawn, Ivy paused and looked back at the house. The Vandermeer estate rose above her, all white columns and glowing windows, trying very hard to look eternal. It wasn't. But for the people inside, tonight would leave a mark that would outlast the floral arrangements and the catering invoices. She turned away and climbed into the helicopter. The crew secured the door. The engines spooled up, rotors quickening. Wind rose again, this time familiar, almost comforting. On the terrace, guests moved to the railing, drawn as if by gravity. Phones lifted, but fewer than before. Some people simply watched with their bare eyes, wanting no filter between them in the moment. The helicopter rose from the lawn in a controlled descent, blades cutting the air with practiced violence. Grass and petals and napkins whipped into miniature storms beneath. The orange figure visible in the side window lifted a hand, just once, in an indistinct gesture that could have been farewell or simply readiness. Then the aircraft climbed into the night, banking toward the dark coastline, its red and white lights blinking against the stars. Within minutes, it was gone. The lawn, once flawless, now bore deep scars where the landing gear had sunk and the rotor wash had ripped up the earth. A wide, ragged circle of torn grass marked the spot where the helicopter had come down. No amount of money could fix it before morning. Inside, the band restarted a slow song out of habit. A few couples swayed awkwardly, limbs moving more out of obligation than joy. Madison stood in the doorway, looking out at the torn ground and the empty sky. Preston approached, tie loosened. "Do you want to do our first dance?" he asked quietly. She stared at him as if he'd spoken another language. "I don't even know who I am in this dress anymore," she said, voice hollow. He had no answer. Elise slipped away to the side of the ballroom, pulling out her phone. Her thumb hovered over her camera app, then slid past it. Instead, she opened a blank message. She began to type, "To whoever needs to hear this, if you ever feel like the room is built to remind you what you're not, someday, you might land on the lawn outside it in the uniform you chose for yourself." She didn't know who she would send it to yet. Maybe to a younger cousin on scholarship, maybe to herself 10 years ago, maybe to nobody at all. She saved it anyway. Outside, under the terrace lights, staff began sweeping up broken glass. One of the younger servers, who had watched everything from the sidelines, his own name tag crooked, paused near the ragged circle in the grass. He pressed the toe of his shoe against the torn earth, feeling the unevenness. "Did that really just happen?" he whispered. The catering manager, exhausted, followed his gaze. "Yes," he said simply. "It did." The younger man looked toward the sky. "Good," he murmured. Inside the estate, the party limped forward toward its scheduled end. Guests would go home and tell the story over and over, each retelling sanding down their own complicity just a little. But no matter how they spun it, one fact would remain. They had invited the scholarship girl to serve them. She had arrived as a rescue officer in a helicopter, and nothing in their carefully arranged world looked quite the same afterward. From where in the world would you be watching this wedding if it were a real story? If Ivy's quiet strength and unexpected triumph moved you, share this video, hit like, and subscribe to Stories Untold for more true-to-life tales of people who refused to stay where others tried to keep them. And in the comments, write one thing you'll never ignore again when you see someone being treated as less. You never know who they might become.